The screen flickered with a static image of my family, smiling from a long-ago 4th of July, just as Eleanor announced to them all, "Walter can't meet my needs anymore. Mitch does." The silence that followed was a physical weight, pressing me down. Then my son Daniel, with a shrug, murmured, "Well, if you're happier, Mom." The rain had come down hard and fast, typical for an early June afternoon, washing out my back nine. I was home by 2:30, earlier than anyone expected. My heart was acting up again, a dull ache just beneath the sternum. Not enough to worry Eleanor, but enough to make me cut short my game with Frank. The golf course parking lot was already half empty, the sky a uniform gray canvas. I drove the familiar route, the wipers struggling to keep the view clear. Pulling into the driveway, I noticed Eleanor's sedan was still there, which was unusual. She usually ran errands on Wednesdays. The front door was unlocked, as always. The house was quiet, the only sound the drumming rain against the windows. I stepped into the living room, intending to shed my damp jacket and perhaps lie down for a while. That's when I saw them. Eleanor was on the sofa, draped in a pink silk robe, the one I'd bought her last Christmas. Beside her, Mitch sat casually, his arms stretched across the back of the sofa. He was barely 30, a boy with too much hair gel and a smirk I'd seen on some of the younger members at the club, the ones who always seemed to be looking for an angle. He had been doing some yard work for us, cutting the grass, maybe cleaning the gutters. His hand rested on Eleanor's bare shoulder. My vision narrowed, a strange clarity descending. "Mitch," I said, my voice flat, holding the damp jacket in my hand. He jumped, his face flushing. Eleanor simply shifted, her eyes meeting mine, devoid of surprise. "Get out," I told him, pointing towards the front door. "Now!" He scrambled to his feet, fumbling for his discarded shirt on the floor. He didn't say a word, just stumbled out, pulling the door shut behind him. The rain sounded louder then. I looked at Eleanor. She sat there adjusting the robe, pulling it tighter. Her expression remained composed, almost clinical. "What is this, Eleanor?" I asked, my voice still level, though I could feel the tremor in my hands. "What does it look like, Walter?" she replied, her tone unruffled. "You haven't been able to meet my needs for a long time." The words were delivered without malice, simply as a statement of fact, like commenting on the weather. I stood there, the rain still running off my jacket onto the hardwood floor. My chest tightened, not the familiar ache, but something new, sharp. "I'm going to Sarah's," she said, rising from the sofa. She walked past me into the bedroom. I heard the rustle of clothes, the snap of a suitcase latch. Minutes later, she reappeared, a small overnight bag in her hand. She didn't look at me as she walked out, closing the door softly. The quiet that followed was absolute, heavier than the rain. I remained standing in the living room, the damp jacket still in my hand, the ghost of Mitch's presence lingering in the air. The house felt larger, emptier. The next day, the 4th of July, dawned with a clear sky, an ironic blue against the gray landscape of my mind. The smell of barbecue smoke was already in the air by noon. Sarah and Daniel, with their spouses, Grega and Maria, and the granddaughters, Hannah and Emily, were all there. The usual crowd. Eleanor arrived later, driven by Sarah. She walked in with a serene smile as if nothing had happened. The intervention began subtly, almost imperceptibly, after the steaks were eaten and the kids were off setting up sparklers. Sarah started, "Dad, Mom's been going through a lot lately." Daniel nodded, taking a swig from his beer. Eleanor sat quietly, observing, her eyes occasionally flicking to mine. Then she spoke, her voice calm, clear, audible over the distant pop of firecrackers. "Walter and I have been having some difficulties," she began, looking at the assembled family. "He hasn't been present for quite some time, emotionally, physically." She paused, then added, "I've found someone who can meet those needs. Mitch." A strange silence followed. I looked at Daniel, expecting anger, confusion. He just nodded again. Sarah put a hand on Eleanor's arm. "Mom deserves to be happy, Dad," she said, her voice gentle but firm. Greg and Maria exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable but not disapproving. Hannah and Emily, thank God, were oblivious, laughing near the fence. "Needs," I heard myself say. My voice sounded thin, alien. "She was with him, in our house yesterday." Eleanor met my gaze directly. Yes, because my needs weren't being met here, Walter. That's a fact. Daniel cleared his throat. Dad, Mom has a right to happiness. We all do. If you can't provide that, then it's her choice. Sarah chimed in. We just want everyone to be happy. If Mitch makes Mom happy. She trailed off, but the implication hung heavy. They had weighed my 60 years of marriage against Eleanor's needs and found me wanting my own children. A profound, icy isolation settled over me. Eleanor smiled, a small, knowing upturn of her lips. She turned to me, her voice almost a whisper. So can I tell Mitch you were just joking about those threats yesterday? I looked at their faces, my children, my grandchildren. All of them. There was no support, no question, no shock, only a unified acceptance of Eleanor's narrative. The weight of their collective judgment was crushing. I didn't answer Eleanor. I simply stood up, pushed my chair back from the picnic table. I'm going for a drive, I said, my voice hoarse. No one stopped me. No one asked where. As I pulled out of the driveway, I heard a faint, distant cheer from the backyard. It wasn't for me. I drove aimlessly, the suburban streets giving way to cornfields, then back to the edge of the city. I found myself on a small, secluded hill overlooking the sprawling lights of the town, the occasional burst of fireworks painting fleeting colors against the night sky. I turned off the engine, listening to the crickets. My mind replayed the scene, the calm delivery of the facts, the collective nod of my family. I was discarded neatly, efficiently, a logical conclusion to a problem they perceived. My place in their world, in my own life, was suddenly undefined. It was well past midnight when I returned. Sarah's car was still in the driveway. She was sitting in the living room, on the very sofa where Eleanor and Mitch had been, waiting up for me. Dad, we just want what's best for everyone, she began, her voice soft. I looked at her, then past her, at the quiet house. Go home, Sarah, I said, the words flat, devoid of warmth. She flinched, then got up, collecting her things. She left without another word. I locked the door, a new ritual. The silence of the house was no longer heavy, but hollow. The marriage, the 60 years, the family, it had all been a structure. Now the supports were gone. The logical conclusion was clear. It was over. I went into the bedroom, pulled my phone from my pocket, and switched it off. The screen went dark, plunging me into a deeper, more intentional solitude. The days after the 4th of July barbecue settled into a strained routine. I still drove to the country club most mornings. The fairways were green, the air clean, but the game itself felt hollow. Each swing, each putt was merely a physical act, a habit. My mind was no longer focused on the arc of the ball or the break of the green. It was a cold, calculating machine, replaying recent events, analyzing Eleanor's words, her expression, the quiet consensus of our children. Golf offered no solace, no escape. Eleanor, for her part, carried on as if a heavy burden had been lifted. Her step was lighter, her conversations on the phone more animated. She moved through the house with a confident ease, an unspoken assumption that I would simply adjust. She was waiting for me to accept the new arrangement, I realized, to fall into line. Her posture, the subtle lift of her chin, all communicated this expectation. It was a clear, factual observation. My own actions became more deliberate, more forensic. I began to watch her, not overtly but with the quiet persistence of a man observing an insect under glass. When she left the room to take a phone call, I noted the timing. When she spoke in hushed tones, her back to me, I cataloged the duration. Her phone, once left casually on the kitchen counter, now frequently vanished into her purse or stayed in her hand. These were not emotional reactions. These were data points. One morning, after Eleanor left for what she called errands, I went into the garage. Her sedan was parked neatly. I knelt beside the driver's side front wheel, noting the odometer reading. It was a simple act, quickly done. When she returned 2 hours later, I repeated the process. A 45-mile difference, a significant distance for a trip to the grocery store and dry cleaner. I started a small, unobtrusive notebook tucked away in my study to record these readings. Then came the credit card statements. They arrived, as always, addressed to both of us. I opened them, my finger steady. The joint account, the one we had maintained for decades, held a ledger of our shared life. Mixed in with the usual grocery bills and gas station receipts, I began to see small anomalies. A flower shop 20 miles away, a coffee shop on the other side of town, a gift shop in a suburb we rarely visited. Small purchases, easily overlooked, but adding up and always outside her usual patterns. The exact amounts, the precise dates went into my growing log. I remembered a conversation from a few years back on the 18th green with Frank, my golf partner. He had mentioned, almost in passing, his sister's messy divorce and how she had eventually hired a private investigator to confirm her husband's activities. At the time, it had seemed like a distant, unpleasant concept. Now it resonated. That evening, after Eleanor had gone to bed, I went to my study. I opened my laptop, navigating to an incognito browser. My search terms were precise: marital investigator, private detective services, infidelity surveillance local. The anonymity of the private browser felt like a necessary shield. Pages of agencies appeared. I sifted through them, looking for local numbers, professional websites, discreet promises. Eventually, I composed an email. It was guarded, outlining a vague need for personal investigative services, avoiding any direct mention of Eleanor or our situation. I hit send, a quiet click echoing in the silent room. My mental log of Eleanor's movements solidified into a physical one. I bought a small, plain, spiral-bound notebook. Her stated departure times, her estimated return times, the odometer readings, the credit card anomalies, all were meticulously entered. It was a factual record, stripped of any emotional commentary. Just data. I found myself going through old photo albums, pulling out pictures. Our wedding day, Eleanor in white, smiling. A vacation in Hawaii 20 years ago, arm in arm. The children when they were small. I laid them on my desk, side by side with the credit card statements and odometer logs. The contrast was stark, not emotionally wrenching, but a cold, factual reminder of a narrative that no longer held true. My mind, ever logical, drifted to the financial aspects. The house, my pension, our investments, 57 years of accumulating assets. The logical division of these things, should it come to that, played out in my thoughts. It was a complex equation, but one that needed to be solved, regardless of the emotional cost. A few days later, I drove to an electronics store in a neighboring town, a place I rarely frequented. I purchased a small, inexpensive digital voice recorder. It fit easily into my palm. The clerk, a young man, barely looked up. I paid in cash. I brought it home, testing its functions quietly in my study, then tucked it away in a drawer, out of sight. It was another tool, a means of gathering more data. Eleanor's routine for her golf day errands became particularly noticeable. These were the days she often spent the most time out. I observed a subtle change. She'd spend a little longer in the bathroom, emerge with a different perfume, not her everyday scent. Her clothes would be chosen with more care, a brighter scarf, a newer blouse. These were small details, but when viewed through the lens of my investigation, they became significant. Another set of data points, confirming a pattern. Scrolling through a particularly dense credit card statement late one night, a new name jumped out at me. Jewelers of the Valley. A modest charge, barely $100, but it wasn't a store Eleanor would usually frequent. It was located on the far side of town, not near any of her regular stops. I circled it in red ink. Another piece of the puzzle slotting into place. The reply from the detective agency came within a day. A Mr. Jenkins suggested a meeting at a diner on the edge of town, a place I rarely visited. It was exactly what I had wanted. Neutral ground, anonymous. We met at 10 in the morning, the diner quiet, the smell of stale coffee and frying bacon hanging in the air. Mr. Jenkins was a man in his late 50s, nondescript, with a neatly trimmed mustache and observant eyes. He carried a worn briefcase. I slid a recent photo of Eleanor across the Formica table. It was one I'd taken a few months ago at our anniversary dinner. She was smiling. I also handed him a typed sheet outlining her usual weekly schedule, her Tuesday golf, her Wednesday errands, her Thursday book club. She often runs errands on Tuesdays as well, I noted. After golf. Mr. Jenkins studied the photo, then the schedule. He spoke in a low, measured tone. detailing the methods of covert surveillance. He explained the use of hidden cameras, GPS tracking, if authorized, and physical tailing. He laid out an hourly rate, mileage, report generation. No surprises, just facts. We document everything, he said, with time-stamped evidence. I want to start with Tuesdays, I told him. Her golf day. Focus on her activities after she leaves the club. I authorized an initial period of surveillance, signing the necessary paperwork with a steady hand. My resolve was firm. This was not about emotion now. It was about gathering evidence. 3 days later, Mr. Jenkins called. I have something for you, Mr. Miller. We met again at the diner. He opened his briefcase and laid out a series of photographs and a concise report. The report detailed Eleanor's movements. She had indeed played golf, then driven away from the club. Her car, the familiar sedan, had then been parked a block away from our house. The report noted the distinct older model pickup truck belonging to Mitch, arriving shortly after Eleanor. The photographs were stark. Mitch, a blur in some, clearly identifiable in others, getting out of his truck. Mitch walking up our driveway, keys in hand, entering the front door. Hours later, Mitch exiting the house, getting back into his truck, driving away. The timestamps were precise, down to the minute. One photo showed Eleanor's car parked on our street, visible in the background as Mitch entered. She's careful in public, Mr. Jenkins remarked, pointing to a photo taken outside a grocery store later that day, where Mitch and Eleanor were seen separately. No overt affection, nothing to suggest a connection outside of the house. It was a detail I hadn't considered, but it made logical sense. She wasn't hiding the affair from me anymore, but she was still maintaining a facade for the world. I reviewed the photos again, focusing on the ones taken inside the house. Mr. Jenkins had managed a few shots through a side window, angled to capture the living room. Eleanor was there, on the sofa, talking to Mitch. Her posture was relaxed, comfortable, leaning towards him. A smile, easy and unforced, on her face. This wasn't the distant, composed Eleanor I saw daily. This was an Eleanor I hadn't seen in years. A cold, hard confirmation settled in my chest. There was no more doubt, only certainty. The facts were laid out before me, undeniable. The betrayal wasn't just an accusation, it was documented. I want you to continue, I told Mr. Jenkins. Expand the surveillance. Her Wednesdays, her Thursdays, any other long outings. He nodded, making notes. Back home, I began to employ the digital voice recorder I'd purchased. I would turn it on discreetly when Eleanor and I were in the same room, during a casual conversation about bills or the garden. My aim was to see if she would, in her newfound candor, offer any further details, perhaps about Mitch or her needs. Most recordings yielded nothing of significance, just mundane chatter. One evening, however, as she discussed plans for a local charity event, she casually slipped in a comment. Carol's friend needed someone to house sit for her while she's away next month. Sounds like a nice place, Quiet. She asked if I knew anyone reliable. My ears perked up. Carol was one of Eleanor's bridge club friends. House sitting? I prompted, keeping my voice even. Eleanor merely shrugged. Oh, just helping out. I told her I might be able to find someone. She didn't elaborate. The recorder hidden in my shirt pocket captured the entire exchange. My next task was to methodically document our shared assets. I pulled out old tax returns, bank statements, investment portfolios, the house deed, the car titles, every piece of paper detailing our 57 years of accumulation. I started a new, more detailed ledger, listing assets on one side, liabilities on the other. It was a precise, almost clinical exercise in deconstruction, preparing for the inevitable legal action. One afternoon when Eleanor was out, I opened her jewelry box. It was a dark mahogany box, a gift from me many Christmases ago. Amidst the familiar necklaces and earrings, I saw it, a small silver pendant shaped like a stylized initial M. It was simple, elegant, and utterly unfamiliar. It was not a gift from me. I noted its presence, closed the box, and logged the observation in my notebook. Another piece of evidence, small but significant. Mr. Jenkins' next report arrived, detailing Eleanor's movements on a recent Tuesday. The golf game was, as usual, completed, But instead of returning home or running familiar errands, Eleanor had met Mitch at the Copper Kettle, a bistro downtown. The report included several photographs. In one, Eleanor was leaning across the table, a smile on her face, Mitch's hand covering hers. Another showed them exiting the restaurant, his arm briefly brushing her lower back as they walked. It was subtle but undeniable. The pretense of just friends outside the house was beginning to fray. Accompanying the report was a detailed background check on Mitch. Late 20s, as I had estimated. No consistent employment listed in the last 5 years. Just a series of odd jobs. Landscaping, handyman work. A pattern emerged. Previous addresses were often linked to older, single women. He had no significant assets, no property, no savings. A factual profile of a man living an opportunistic existence. Mr. Jenkins had also cross-referenced some of the unusual credit card charges from my earlier findings with Mitch's known residences. The flower shop purchase? It was near an apartment Mitch had occupied for a few months last year. The gift shop in the distant suburb? Half a mile from a family member's house he was currently staying at. The puzzle pieces were fitting together with chilling precision. Then came the bank statements. I always reviewed them, a habit of decades. I noticed a series of recurring electronic transfers, relatively small amounts initially, but increasing in frequency and size. The destination account was new, one I didn't recognize, and it was listed as a single signature account solely in Eleanor's name. The transfers were consistent, almost weekly. This was not merely an affair, this was a financial transfer of assets. I made an appointment, not with a general practitioner, but with an attorney specializing in divorce and specifically financial fraud. His name was Mr. Thompson, recommended by Frank's sister. His office was austere, functional. I laid out the reports, the bank statements, the odometer logs, the photographs. He listened, his face impassive. This is not uncommon, Mr. Miller, he said, adjusting his glasses. The transfers to a separate account. They build a nest egg, anticipating an exit. The good news is, depending on the amounts and timing, these funds can often be traced and recovered as part of the marital estate. He outlined the legal avenues, the discovery process, the potential for injunctive relief. It was a cold, hard lesson in the legal ramifications of betrayal. I commissioned a forensic financial audit through Mr. Jenkins' agency. Their goal was to trace every unusual expenditure, every transfer, every financial thread that connected Eleanor and Mitch, or Eleanor's new account. I needed a complete financial picture, precise and defensible in court. One evening after dinner, I decided to test Eleanor's reaction. I picked up a recent credit card statement from the kitchen counter. Eleanor, I said, pointing to a particularly large, unfamiliar charge from a high-end clothing boutique. What's this? I don't recall you mentioning a purchase from here. She barely glanced at it. Oh, that, she said, waving a dismissive hand. It was for a friend. A surprise gift. You know how Carol always admired that silk scarf? Her tone was vague, evasive. She looked away, busying herself with clearing plates. It was a practiced deflection, lacking specific details, relying on my expected lack of follow-up. Later that week, while Eleanor was out at her book club, I conducted a more thorough search of her personal effects. I knew she often kept important papers hidden. I found them tucked away in an old hat box in the back of her closet, beneath a pile of scarves. A series of bank statements for the single signature account. They confirmed my earlier observations and revealed even larger, more frequent transfers than I had initially suspected. Each date, each amount, was meticulously transcribed into my ledger. The scale of the financial diversion was growing clearer. I acquired a small wireless camera, no larger than a thimble. After careful consideration, I installed it in my home study, camouflaged within a stack of old books on a shelf, angled towards the shared desk and file cabinet. This would capture any unauthorized access to documents or financial records she might attempt to conceal or remove. It was a quiet escalation of my data collection. Eleanor's grooming habits continued to evolve. For her Tuesday golf or her Wednesday errands, her preparations grew longer. The scent of her perfume became more pronounced. I noticed new items of clothing appearing in her wardrobe. Small, expensive-looking blouses, scarves, even a delicate gold chain I hadn't seen before. They were items I hadn't purchased for her, and she hadn't mentioned buying them. She was investing in her new life, I realized, with our money. The confrontation took place in the living room, late afternoon. The sun was slanting through the windows, illuminating dust motes in the air. I laid the stack of photographs on the coffee table. The images of Mitch entering our house, of them at the copper kettle, Mitch's hand over hers. Eleanor sat opposite me, her expression shifting from casual interest to a thin-lipped defensiveness. "What is this, Walter?" she asked, picking up a photo of Mitch in our driveway. Her voice was flat, but I detected a slight tremor. "Evidence, Eleanor?" I replied, my voice calm, factual. "Evidence of your affair with Mitch." She tossed the photo back onto the table. "Oh, please, don't be ridiculous. He's a friend. We had lunch. The photos are misleading." Her dismissal was immediate, practiced. I leaned forward slightly. "Mitch, late 20s, no stable employment. History of living with older women, dependent on their support." I recited the facts from the background report. "He's not just a friend, Eleanor. He's a pattern." Her composure fractured then. Her eyes narrowed. "You've been spying on me. How dare you, Walter? This is an invasion of my privacy." The accusation held no weight. It was a diversion. "Your privacy ceased to be a unilateral concern when you invited him into our home and into our finances," I stated, my tone even. "And when you chose to broadcast your needs to our children, it became a public matter." She began to raise her voice, her argument defaulting to the familiar script. "You haven't been present, Walter. You haven't met my needs. This is all your fault. You pushed me away." She gestured wildly, invoking the same vague deficiencies she'd used to justify her actions to the children. I pushed a small stack of receipts across the table. These were copies I'd made from the hidden bank statements for her single-signature account, clearly showing payments to Jewelers of the Valley and the boutique. "These purchases," I said, tapping them, "were made from funds transferred from our joint account into yours, then spent on gifts for Mitch." "Is this also my fault, Eleanor? Is this a part of your needs?" She stared at the receipts, her face paling. The evasive answers she usually employed would not suffice. "I'll tell the children," she spat, her voice lower now, laced with a familiar threat. "They'll side with me. They always do. They understand." "Their opinion, Eleanor," I said, meeting her gaze, "holds no legal bearing in this matter. This is not a family discussion. This is a legal one." The words hung in the air, heavy and decisive. I watched her closely, her jaw tightened. Her eyes darted away, then back to me. "I've engaged an attorney," I continued, "specializing in divorce and asset recovery. We are pursuing all legal options." The effect was immediate. The color drained from her face. She looked visibly stunned, as if I had spoken in a foreign language. The name Mr. Thompson seemed to echo in the silent room. Her carefully constructed world, built on my presumed acquiescence in the children's support, was crumbling. "Walter," she whispered, her voice cracking. "After 40 years, our life together, all the memories." She invoked the past, the shared history, a desperate, emotional plea. "Your actions, Eleanor, and your sustained deceit have irrevocably destroyed that bond," I stated, unyielding. "The trust is gone. The respect is gone. What remains is a legal unraveling." I stood up, signaling the end of the conversation. "This is my ultimatum. Cease all contact with Mitch immediately and permanently, or face immediate divorce proceedings with full disclosure of all findings." I left the room, giving her space, but not really. I moved to the study, the door slightly ajar. Moments later, I heard the faint rustle of her getting up, the hurried click of a phone being dialed. Her voice was a low murmur, indecipherable, but the pattern was clear. She was calling Mitch. The choice had been made. In the days that followed, Eleanor became more secretive. Her phone, once left casually on the counter, was now always in her hand or tucked away. I'd see her typing on it, then quickly lock the screen if I entered the room. Her calls were taken in the bedroom, the door closed, her voice a hushed whisper. The air in the house was thick with unspoken tension, a cold war under the surface of routine. One morning, taking out the kitchen trash, I noticed a small, crumpled piece of paper at the bottom of the can. It was a torn corner of a napkin, with Mitch's distinctive, sprawling handwriting. "Call me soon. Need to talk, M." It was a small detail, easily missed, but another confirmation. My ultimatum had been ignored. The path ahead was clear. As the story of Eleanor and Walter unfolds, and the careful demolition of their life together continues, stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. The divorce papers were filed on a Thursday. Mr. Thompson handled the specifics, ensuring all relevant evidence of Eleanor's financial impropriety was included in the petition. Irreconcilable differences, compounded by the diversion of marital assets. It was a precise legal dissection of our 57 years. Eleanor was served at the house. Her reaction was predictable, observed from a distance. The initial shock gave way to a furious disbelief, then a public display of outrage, directed at the process server. Within an hour, my phone began to ring. Sarah first, then Daniel. I let both calls go to voicemail. I knew what was coming. They arrived together the next evening, unannounced. The air in the living room was thick with their accusations. "Dad, how could you?" Sarah began, her voice tight with indignation. "After all these years, this is so cold, so spiteful. It's completely unnecessary escalation." Daniel, his arms crossed, added, "What are you trying to do? Embarrass Mom? Embarrass us? You're dragging her name through the mud." He looked genuinely disappointed. I sat opposite them at the coffee table where I had presented the photos to Eleanor. I laid out the same stack of documents, the PI reports, the surveillance photos, the bank statements for Eleanor's hidden account, the detailed forensic audit outlining the transfers. "Eleanor chose this path," I stated, my voice calm, factual. "Her continued affair, her deceit, and specifically her diversion of marital assets." My ultimatum was clear. She ignored it. I pointed to the bank statements. "These are transfers from our joint account to a private account, solely in Eleanor's name, funds which were then used to support Mitch and purchase him gifts. This is not about needs, Daniel. This is about theft." Sarah's initial indignation wavered slightly. She picked up a statement, her brow furrowed. "But Mom said..." "She said you were just being difficult." Daniel, however, focused immediately on the numbers. He was a financial planner. He understood the implications. "These are substantial sums, Dad, and they're all recent. What's this Jewelers of the Valley charge?" He looked at me, a flicker of doubt, a different kind of concern in his eyes. Not about his mother's happiness, but about the family's money. "This impacts our inheritance, potentially, if it's considered dissipated assets." I explained the forensic audit, how it traced specific funds to Mitch, to his benefit. I showed them the detailed ledger Mr. Jenkins had prepared, itemizing the expenditures. The meticulous precision of the audit, the undeniable figures, began to chip away at their initial loyalty to Eleanor's narrative. Sarah, still defensive, finally turned her attention to the financial documents. "Mom, what is this?" I heard her ask Eleanor later that evening over the phone, her voice hushed but firm. "Dad showed us the statements. That large transfer to Mitch's landlord." Eleanor, I learned through Sarah's frustration, minimized everything. "Walter is exaggerating," she told them. "He's vengeful. He's not thinking clearly. These are minor things trying to make me look bad." She maintained her victim narrative, painting me as a cold, calculating antagonist. The children were caught in the middle, torn between the emotional appeal of their mother and the undeniable financial facts I presented. My granddaughters, Hannah and Emily, sensed the change. They were 8 and 6. They didn't understand the legal terms, but they understood the tension in the house, the absence of their grandmother's easy presence. "Grandpa, why is Grandma living at Aunt Sarah's house?" Emily asked one afternoon. "Are you mad at her?" Their confusion, their sadness, was a direct consequence of Eleanor's choices. I maintained limited formal contact with Sarah and Daniel. Our conversations were brief, functional, revolving around logistics or their mother's emotional state, never about reconciliation. My focus was on the legal process. Each piece of evidence, every report, every bank statement was meticulously organized, labeled, and prepared for the upcoming court proceedings. I was building an airtight case, not out of malice, but out of necessity. Eleanor, through Sarah, made a half-hearted attempt at reconciliation. She said she'd end things with Mitch, Dad, Sarah reported, her voice hopeful. If you just drop all this, she wants to come home. It's too late, Sarah, I replied, the words firm, unemotional. The trust is gone. The financial impropriety is documented. There is no going back. My decision was final. The social fallout was quiet but present. At the country club, some of my longtime friends would offer polite but distant greetings. I overheard whispers in the locker room, fragments of conversations, all stemming from Eleanor's carefully crafted narrative. Poor Eleanor, Walter's being so difficult. He's just so cold now. I was judged quietly by those who only knew one side of the story. It was another consequence I had to endure, another factual reality of my new existence. The courtroom was sterile, functional. Hard wooden benches, a raised dais for the judge, the air conditioning humming. The proceedings began. Mr. Thompson, my attorney, was precise, his movements economical. He laid out the evidence. Mr. Jenkins' reports, the time-stamped surveillance photos of Mitch entering and exiting our home, the bistro pictures. Then came the forensic financial audit, projected onto a screen for clarity. Every transfer, every expenditure, every dollar siphoned from our joint accounts into Eleanor's private one, then to Mitch, was accounted for. The numbers were irrefutable. Eleanor's attorney, a younger woman with an aggressive style, attempted to frame me as a controlling, vindictive husband. She spoke of midlife issues and unreasonable expectations. She tried to paint Eleanor as a woman seeking solace and understanding in the face of my alleged emotional neglect. It was a narrative I had anticipated, a familiar refrain. Then came Eleanor's turn on the stand. Mr. Thompson began his cross-examination, his voice calm, methodical. Mrs. Miller, he began, you testified that Mr. Miller was emotionally distant. Did this emotional distance also necessitate transferring significant sums of money from your joint marital account to a personal account and then to a third party? Mr. Mitch Harding. Eleanor faltered. Her answers became evasive. Her carefully constructed facade, which had held firm for the family, began to crack under the pressure of sworn testimony. She stammered, contradicted herself, struggled to explain the dozens of transactions. The silver pendant, the lavish gifts, the rent payments for Mitch. Each item was presented, each tied to a specific transfer from her hidden account. The judge, a woman with a keen analytical gaze, interjected. Mrs. Miller, can you explain the necessity of providing such extensive financial support to Mr. Harding, a man you claim was just a friend, given your husband's testimony that Mr. Harding was also engaging in a romantic relationship with you? Her tone was devoid of judgment, merely seeking clarification of facts. Mitch's background was then introduced, his lack of consistent employment, his history of romantic relationships with older, financially stable women. The pattern was clear, laid bare for the court. He wasn't just a gardener or a friend, he was a liability, and Eleanor was financing him with marital funds. Sarah and Daniel were present in the courtroom. I saw them in the third row, their expressions shifting as the testimony unfolded. They watched their mother squirm on the stand, saw her struggle to maintain her composure. They heard the irrefutable financial data, the detailed accounts of money moved not just for needs, but for a lifestyle supported by deception. The calculated financial and emotional deception by Eleanor became starkly clear to them, not as an accusation from me, but as a factual finding of the court. When I testified, my account was factual, concise. I detailed the timeline, the discovery, the intervention, Eleanor's continued deceit, the initiation of surveillance, the collection of financial records. There was no emotion in my voice, only the steady presentation of data. I answered questions directly, without elaboration or embellishment. Eleanor's legal team attempted to discredit Mr. Jenkins' evidence, arguing it was an invasion of privacy, perhaps even doctored. But Mr. Thompson had prepared meticulously. The chain of custody for the photographs, the meticulous logs, the corroborating financial data, it was too thorough to be easily dismissed. The court then reviewed the selected snippets from the digital voice recorder. Eleanor's casual admissions, her mention of Carol's friend needing house sitting, which in context now clearly referred to Mitch's need for housing. The evasions, the half-truths, the calculated omissions from her own mouth now played back in the cold, objective environment of the courtroom. Her attempts to frame me as the sole problem in the marriage were systematically dismantled, piece by logical piece, by the weight of her own words and actions. The judge made visible notes. The substantial financial discrepancies, the clear lack of transparency on Eleanor's part, the documented support of a third party. These were the facts. As the truth unfolded, fact by fact laid bare in the public record, I felt no sense of triumph, no elation, only a weary, cold vindication. The truth, however unpleasant, was now official. The judge's ruling came down with the same precision that had marked the entire proceedings. Walter Miller versus Eleanor Miller. The equitable division of marital assets largely favored my position. The judge ordered Eleanor to repay a significant portion of the funds she had transferred from our joint accounts to her private one, specifically those funds proven to have supported Mitch. The decision, though phrased in legal terms, was an implicit acknowledgement of her marital misconduct and financial exploitation. It was a factual statement of responsibility. Eleanor's reaction was immediate and visible. She erupted in a mixture of fury and despair, her face contorted. Her plan, so carefully orchestrated, so confidently executed with the backing of our children, had backfired completely. The legal system, unlike our family, had not been swayed by her narrative of needs. Mitch, as predicted, vanished. The moment news of Eleanor's diminished financial capacity and her new legal obligations reached him, he severed all contact. He wasn't interested in a relationship that required him to contribute. His departure was swift, confirming his opportunistic nature, another factual data point in Eleanor's unfortunate education. Sarah and Daniel confronted Eleanor shortly after the ruling. I didn't witness it directly, but the aftermath conveyed through strained phone calls was clear. They expressed feelings of betrayal and anger. "Mom, how could you do this? All that money?" "Dad showed us everything," Daniel said, his voice cold. Sarah's questions were sharper, laced with a raw disappointment. "Did you really think we wouldn't find out? That it wouldn't come out in court?" Eleanor, I was told, tried to deflect, blamed me for being vindictive, blamed Mitch for being misleading. But her credibility with her children was irrevocably shattered. The carefully crafted image of the wronged wife, seeking only happiness, was replaced by the harsh reality of a woman who had lied and stolen. Hannah and Emily, my granddaughters, were not privy to the legal details, but they absorbed the distress of their parents. They saw the changes, the distance, the unhappiness. They began to understand in a child's fragmented way that their grandmother had done something wrong, something that caused much sadness. The social landscape also shifted. Family friends who had initially sympathized with Eleanor, hearing her version of events, now began to discreetly shift their alliances. Invitations to Eleanor became fewer. Some avoided her altogether. The quiet social judgment, once directed at me, now settled firmly on her. The truth, once it came out in the public record, had a way of correcting narratives. I felt a quiet sense of relief. It was not joy, not celebration. Joy seemed a distant, irrelevant concept. It was simply the cessation of a long, arduous process, a cold, hard peace. The facts had been presented, justice had been served, as much as it could be in such a situation. My next step was practical. I put the marital home on the market. It was a large house, too large for one person. It held 57 years of memories, both good and bad, now tainted by the recent events. The process of packing and sorting was methodical, a physical act of detachment. I began looking for a smaller residence, a condominium, something with less upkeep, less space to echo with the past. Eleanor, stripped of a significant portion of her funds and without a home, struggled. She tried staying with Sarah for a while, but the tension was too great. Daniel couldn't offer permanent solutions. Her future was bleak, uncertain, a direct consequence of her choices. Then an unexpected call. Daniel. His voice was subdued. "Dad," he said, "I wanted to apologize. We misjudged you." We should have listened sooner. I understand now. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was an acknowledgement, a small, tentative step towards a different kind of relationship. Sarah remained distant, still processing, still grappling with the profound disillusionment her mother's actions had caused, and her own initial vocal support. I quietly began to rebuild my life. I re-engaged with my golf group, the familiar routine, a welcome anchor. I started new solitary routines, morning walks, reading in the evenings, quiet contemplation. The emotional wreckage was still present, a landscape scarred, but I was moving forward, one logical step at a time. Eleanor was left isolated. Mitch had vanished completely, a logical consequence of her diminished financial capacity. Her children, Sarah and Daniel, no longer called with the easy familiarity of before. The illusion of a family united against me had shattered, revealing the truth of her solitary gamble. Her financial situation, once stable, was now precarious. The court-ordered repayments and the lack of income, a direct and severe result of her deliberate choices. The moral consequences of her actions were not abstract. They were her new, stark reality. Slowly, tentatively, Sarah and Daniel began to repair their relationship with me. It started with Daniel, a simple phone call, then a visit. "Dad," he said, sitting in my newly sparse living room, "I was wrong about everything. I should have trusted you." Sarah's reconciliation was slower, burdened by the weight of her initial fierce defense of her mother. But the apologies came, genuine and laced with regret for their blind support of Eleanor's affair. I acknowledged their attempts. There was no warmth, no sudden embrace, but a quiet, cautious acceptance. The trust was damaged, perhaps permanently, but the logical step was to try and rebuild what could be saved. Hannah and Emily sent me letters, scrawled drawings, and simple words. "Dear Grandpa, we miss you. We understand." Their innocence cut through the lingering bitterness, offering a fragile thread of connection. Eleanor attempted to initiate contact, a few phone calls, a handwritten note left in the mailbox. Her voice was thin, pleading, "Walter, can't we just talk?" I politely, firmly declined. There was nothing left to discuss. The facts had been laid out, the decisions made, the consequences enacted. Further interaction would only introduce unnecessary emotional complexity. I continued my solitary routine life. Mornings on the golf course, afternoons reading or handling the practicalities of my new existence. A quiet, almost cold peace settled over me. There was no joy, no profound happiness, but a distinct absence of the turmoil that had defined the past months. It was a stripped-down existence, clean and uncomplicated. I reflected on the immense cost of my logical investigation, the complete dissolution of my immediate family unit, as it had existed for decades, was the undeniable price. Yet I accepted Eleanor's self-inflicted isolation as the ultimate moral consequence of her deceit. It was a harsh justice, perhaps, but a just one. On the golf course, I found a new companionship, not a replacement for what was lost, but a new thread. Frank, a widower from the next town over, often joined me. We talked about the market, the weather, occasionally shared quiet observations about life, devoid of emotional drama. It was a simple, uncomplicated connection. The old house finally sold. It closed a significant chapter, its emptiness a poignant symbol of the end of an era. The new owners were a young family, their laughter already echoing through the rooms. I moved into a smaller condominium, a space that felt appropriate for my new, singular existence. Eleanor, I heard through occasional distant whispers from old acquaintances, lived a lonely, diminished life. Her relentless pursuit of needs had led her to complete abandonment and profound desolation. She had traded 57 years of stability for a fleeting illusion, and the bill had come due. I occasionally saw my grandchildren, Hannah and Emily. We went for ice cream or to the park. The rebuilding was slow, careful, but present. A connection, however fragile, was being forged from the wreckage. My story concluded with a quiet, cold contentment. I had navigated profound betrayal with logical precision, gathering facts, presenting evidence, and seeing the consequences unfold. Eleanor faced the harsh, inescapable reality of her choices, while I simply continued, one foot in front of the other, through the stark, unvarnished truth of a life rebuilt. The profound consequences of Eleanor's betrayal extended far beyond the courtroom's final ruling. She was left precisely where her choices had led her. Isolated, financially vulnerable, and deeply estranged from the very children she had manipulated to support her deceit. Mitch, her needs fulfilled for a time, had evaporated like morning mist, a testament to his transactional nature. Eleanor's carefully constructed life of comfort and social standing had crumbled, replaced by a bleak existence marked by loneliness and diminished means. For Walter, there was no triumphant joy, only a cold, hard peace. He had navigated the wreckage with logical precision, and the truth, however painful, had ultimately prevailed. His children, once misled, began the slow, arduous process of repairing their relationship, a quiet testament to the enduring power of factual evidence over emotional manipulation. The old house, a monument to their shared history, was sold, its physical emptiness mirroring the void left by betrayal. Walter found a new solitary rhythm, a life built on quiet routine and unburdened by deceit. Eleanor, in contrast, faced the desolate landscape of a future entirely of her own making, her needs having cost her everything.